Hey everyone. So I am going to go over emotion regulation handout 13, which is reviewing opposite action and problem solving. And this is just another uh, uh, chart, so to speak, that's going to be a really nice reference to look back on and to refer to when you are kind of making these decisions on, okay, am I gonna go the route of opposite action? Am I gonna go the route of problem solving? What's gonna be the game plan? And so it's broken down really nicely into it's got all the different emotions. It then has what the justifying events are for experiencing those emotions. It then has if you have made the decision that the emotion is unjustified or the level, the intensity of the emotion is unjustified. It has different types of ways to engage in opposite action. And then lastly, it has different problem solving techniques, which include acting on the emotion, specifically problem solving or avoiding. And these are broken out into columns, and we've actually already covered the first two columns in terms of, okay, well, what are justifying events and what does acting opposite look like? We have already covered those two. And so I'm really going to focus on kind of this third column, which is more the problem solving route. And I'm going to stick for most of this with just that first example, which is fear. And I'm going to go through kind of the different types of things that you can engage in, which constitutes and is as problem solving. And so in this first one, I'm gonna refer you to the handout and to kind of that first box and on the far right under the act on emotion, urge, problem solve, or avoid. And it gives you four different options that you can engage in response to fear. The first one is to freeze or run if danger is near. This is an example of actually acting on the emotion itself. And folks sometimes uh, overlook this as oh, is this really a problem solving skill? And yeah, emotions are actually, they exist because their function is oftentimes to solve a problem. And so for me, again, the example being uh, um, if a kiddo is running in the street, and I use that example repeatedly, not because I'm like never watching my kids and they're always running in the street, but rather we live on like an incline, and so um, or we play a lot, and balls will like roll down and out into the street, and so I'm having to like sprint down. And so, but in that case, like if I see one of my kiddos starting to run or dart out, I get a surge of feeling that fear, and I act on that, right? And I grab my son or daughter, and in that actually solves the problem of safety, right? And so oftentimes acting on that emotion is helpful for problem solving. The second example or second bullet point is remove the threatening event. And so this is an example of, okay, you can problem solve by changing the environment or situation in some way. And so the example being, if you if you see a mouse running across your floor in your home, and you get a chair and you stand up on the chair to avoid the mouse, which is something that I don't know if I would do it or not. I've dealt with this before. It's not fun. My kids definitely would. I have in the past a couple times. But that, it gives you distance from what the fear is. But it doesn't actually solve the problem, right? If anything, like you're now above it, but you're looking down and you're now seeing the mouse as it's like going around and getting food and might be like trying to climb even the chair, I don't know. But in those situations, like fear is actually as a result probably increasing even more. And so alternatively, the problem solving skill of, okay, well, what about removing the threatening event or item or situation? It's changing the environment. And so that would be like, okay, well, how am I going to get this mouse out of my house? Which might be any number of factors. And it might be in steps, right? Because first you have to get off of the chair, out the door to your car, so you can go to the hardware store to get some type of trap. And then go from there. But that's an example of, okay, we're going to actually change the environment in some way. Back to my example, it might be, I'm going to, it would look absurd because it would just be in the middle of the yard because it's a slope, but to put up like a fence, that would change the environment. Then balls aren't going down, kids aren't going down into the street or anything like that. That would be a way of changing the environment. I could do massive landscape work, which could change the slope of the yard. That would be another example of changing the environment. The third option is do what gives you a sense of control and mastery of the fearful situation. So what this is looking at is really changing how you think about the situation in order to kind of increase that sense of control. It might be things like positive self-talk or self-affirmations, an idea of like, okay, or checking facts. The mouse it's actually smaller than me. It's probably has more fear of me than I do of it because I'm so much bigger. I'm going to get down. I'm going to go and, whatever. The threat isn't that large. It's probably not going to hurt me. It's a mouse that's in a house. It's probably not sick or anything like that. I can handle this. I can tolerate this. Things like that. Alternatively, and this would be like another example, of changing the way you're thinking about a situation would be if you have a difficult experience with a friend such that the relationship is fractured or it's ended, and they were really close, that feeling of loss or sadness, how can you think about it differently to increase that sense of control from the standpoint of, thinking about it in terms of thinking of other friends that you could rely on, for example, thinking of ways that you could go out and meet new people, thinking of other family members and other friends who you're close to, things like that. So again, changing the way you're thinking about the situation. And then the third, and then so staying with the I don't know, people can give me an examples. I don't know about changing the way of thinking about the slope on my yard, or to give me more control. It may be something like, but this might be also changing the environment. But it might be thinking about and preparing, knowing like, okay, there is a slope, and so the balls are going to roll down the hill because they always do, and so as a result, maybe I position myself in a different spot. That might be a combination of I think that would count in terms of that gives me more control over the situation. So I'm changing the way I'm thinking about the situation, which is then changing my behavior, which is then giving me more of a sense of I have control over the situation, and then balls are coming down, I'm just grabbing them and no one's running in the street. So there you go. The last one is just avoid the threatening event or situation. And so this is really to speak to the reality that there are some situations that we cannot change. whether it be a power differential, whether it be I don't know, there are things in our lives that we try to problem solve and change, and it turns out that we can't. I think of an example of when if a kiddo is getting bullied at school, and the kiddo has exhausted so many options. They've gone to the administrators and their teachers, and they've tried to get help on that front. It still keeps going. They talk to the bullies and be like, hey, come on, whatever. Still keeps happening. And it just feels like they've exhausted all their options. Then the next step might be, well, do everything I can to just avoid the interactions, period. So I might change the route that I walk, so that the bullies, I don't see them as frequently, blocking them on social media, things like that. There are situations in which we might not be able to do a whole lot other than avoid the threat or avoid whatever is prompting that emotion. So those are the different options that you can go in. And I think one of the biggest take homes here is the reality that our emotions themselves and our action urges can potentially be problem solving in and of themselves. And so usually it's this combination of, okay, what's the action urge, and then the wise mind, and then you put them together and it's like, yeah, I think that is something that is going to be, that's going to be an effective thing for me. The one emotion you want to be careful with in particular, in terms of the action urge is with regards to anger, because of course, oftentimes action urge to anger would be to fight back, right? And you only want to do this if you know that it is going to be effective. And so, it coming to mind, something like if there is a real threat and you are getting you're getting grabbed and pulled out of your car or something. That's the book that's the example that the book gives. Then that might be your only option, and so you would move forward there, but only doing it when it's effective. And then it's important to look through. You have a ton of emotions on here. You have disgust, envy, jealousy, love, sadness, shame, guilt, and sadness. Sadness is, with regards to problem solving, one of the pieces that might kind of turn some heads, right, is that one of the ways of problem solving sadness is actually allowing yourself to grieve. There's plenty of literature out there that suggests that the grief process is a very real thing, and is actually quite necessary for processing loss and sadness, which in the long term results in reductions in that emotion. And so that's an example where you're kind of going to be using problem solving and opposite action. There's going to be some overlap there, right? Because there's this piece of like, okay, so you're going to problem solve and be grieving, and as a result, really feeling that sadness. And then as that process is nearing and coming to an end, you're switching into opposite action such that it's like, okay, well, how do I keep going and start engaging in meaningful tasks that might make me feel joy? And then you're figuring out, okay, well, how do I continue on and rebuild my life in a meaningful way, again, while also honoring whatever that loss was. So that's a great example of how things can go back and forth, where you might be problem solving at the beginning, and then you've problem solved everything. But then you are still feeling that emotion, you might need to engage in opposite action. One for me that comes to mind is with guilt. So if I have offended somebody, um, then I will go through the problem solving steps of, and for me, it's approaching the person saying, "Hey, look, here's what I did. I'm sorry," and going through that, and the response is like, "Oh, thank you so much. I accept your apology," and off we go. And then I still though feel guilt. And what oftentimes occurs is the repeated, like, "Are you sure you're okay? Like, I'm really sorry. Is there anything else I can do?" And in the past, it's hit a point where the person is like, "Paul, come on, like, enough. Like, you're now annoying me." And so that would be a situation in which, I've gone through the steps for problem solving guilt. And then if I am still feeling some of that guilt, it's then going back to checking the facts as like, "Oh, okay, well, I've already addressed this." And at that point, the emotion has gone from actually justified to unjustified. And at that point, you're then going to engage in opposite action. So that's an example of how these skills fit together. So thank you all so much, and see you soon.